This is your daily dose of all things royal. The reigning British monarch, a figure who once seemed like the steady hand of tradition, is at the heart of a question that has been nagging at many people, including myself. Why would a king, of all people, seem to be undermining the very throne he sits on, especially when it comes to defending the faith? Before I go into rationalizing and speculating what I think is happening, please note that these are all my opinions in comprehending what I'm witnessing. So please feel free to do your own research and add to the conversation. This is meant to open up awareness and pique curiosity. My opinions are my own, and it's okay if you don't agree. I'm just asking everyone to please keep an open mind. The monarchy has always been the beating heart of Britain's identity, their history, their pride. It's a sense of who they are. It's tied to the land, to Christianity, to the stories told about what makes them British. But the world has been shifting under everyone's feet. The idea of nations, of borders, of a shared heritage, it's all being eroded in a world where the elite is obsessed with global systems, climate goals, and identities that don't quite fit the old mold. At least here in the United States, Americans are fighting hard to hold on to what we are. Just because Trump is in office doesn't mean the threat has left. Now, I overhear a lot of people in my comment section saying how different Europe is, as well as the UK not being the same anymore. The question of relevance of the monarchy's purpose is starting to feel more like a prop than a pillar. We would be naive to think Charles doesn't see that too. Maybe that's why he's leaning into something bigger than Britain. I mean, you really can't miss it. It's not conspiracy. The speeches about climate change, the nods to global unity, the royal family cozying up to groups over decades like the World Economic Forum or the UN. From my observation and research, it very much appears Charles is trading in the crown's old shine for a new kind of sparkly one. The average British citizen on the street doesn't sit down for tea or a pint of beer and talk about supranational governance. Really quick, for those that don't know what supranational governance means, is when countries team up and share some of their decision-making power with a higher authority, like a global or regional organization, to tackle big issues that cross borders. Think trade, climate, and/or peace. It's like neighbors agreeing to let a community council set rules for the whole block. But each country still keeps its own identity and most of its control. The catch here, though, is the council's decisions are binding, so everyone's got to follow them in those agreed upon areas. So examples of these types of organizations, you have the EU, you have the World Trade Organization, the ICC, the African Union, and you have NATO. Whether you realize it or not, you are feeling the effects of the decisions that has been agreed upon. Higher taxes, green policies that make heating the house a luxury, and a sense that decisions are being made far above your heads. If you look at other Western nations and their leaders, they're all behaving and governing in the same way. And it looks like Charles sees the monarchy's future is not in ruling a nation, but in line the same way influencing a world where nations matter less. Supranational governance is the stepping stone to a post-national world, and ultimately, for some, a vision of a one-world government. So why a stepping stone? Well, supranational governance gets countries comfortable with cooperation. When nations join groups like the EU or the World Trade Organization, they practice making decisions together, like agreeing on climate rules or trade standards. This builds trust and habits of working as a team, which could nudge the world closer to a post-national mindset where people think, hey, maybe we don't need such rigid borders. For example, EU citizens move freely across countries, which starts to blur national lines a bit. But here's the catch. Supranational governance doesn't automatically lead to a post-national world. It's a practical step. Countries still hold on to their sovereignty and can back out, like the UK did with Brexit. A post national world is a bigger leap where nations might dissolve or lose importance, and that's a tough sell. I mean, ultimately, this is the direction that these elites want to push everybody towards. You know how people love their national identity and worry a post national world could erase their culture, hence the reason why we're seeing all these other outside influences flooding various communities in order to drive the so called identity out. Others see supernatural groups as testing the waters for deeper unity. And we hear King Charles always talking about this need for unifying communities. The way that I see King Charles right now, he's positioning the institution to evolve with a post-national world. Their focus is on global cooperation through supranational systems like the UN or World Economic Forum to tackle issues like climate change, encouraging a mindset where shared goals overrule national divides. You know, you could look at this like neighbors caring more about the community than their own yards. Charles's environmental advocacy and Great Reset support heavily align with this, promoting unity and sustainability without explicitly calling for a single global government. While supranational governance is a stepping stone to a post-national world, it is far from the centralized government and dismantling of sovereignty that many people fear. It is definitely on the path and can evolve to one world government, but there are a lot of hurdles to get to that end state. This would not happen in King Charles's lifetime, maybe not even in William's lifetime, but the idea is there, and that is the direction they have been heading now for decades. The royals have to evolve themselves to preserve the institution. They're not just aristocrats anymore. Charles is out there championing the planet, shaking hands with corporate bigwigs, talking about sustainability while his PR is spinning it as his life mission. It's a clever move in a way, I guess. The monarchy's old, stuffy image, traditional and Christian, doesn't play as well in a world where people are more likely to worship themselves or what they are being conditioned to accept by bureaucrats and technocrats. If you really stop and listen to King Charles, he has been positioning himself as a global moral leader. Charles is trying to preserve and keep the crown relevant. And what people don't realize is this forceful shift into this post-national world is happening. The monarchy is supposed to be a symbol of Britain, not a mouthpiece for global agendas. Every time Charles aligns with these distant institutions like the World Economic Forum or the UN, it's like he's handing over a bit of what makes the UK grounded. The elites might call it progress, but the UK, it's starting to look like a pivot away from the people who've kept the monarchy alive for centuries. And as I've watched from afar, British nationals are rising up for everything from fuel prices to free speech. I can't shake the feeling that Charles is selling his people out in the name of securing his and his family's influence in the future. It's leaving a lot of people wondering where are they going to fit in the so-called post-national world he's without a question helping to build. Over the last 4 years running this channel, I've had the privilege to listening to many of you share comments of what is happening around you. For many in the UK, as well as other realms in King Charles's kingdom, I know life has been feeling a bit overwhelming lately. Bills piling up, new rules popping up everywhere, and a sense that things are changing faster than you can keep up with. By now, I am pretty sure you have heard one of these terms being referenced either in the news or online, whether it be the Great Reset, Agenda 2030, or this thing called global governance. More specifically, why King Charles is so involved in it all. Let's start with the Great Reset. Back in 2020, when COVID had us stuck at home, King Charles teamed up with the World Economic Forum. They launched this idea to rebuild better, or build back better after the pandemic. Sounds nice, right? Fix the economy, make things fair. But here's what it looks like for all of us. new rules pushing businesses to go green, which sounds great until your local shop shuts down because they can't afford the new taxes or regulations. Or how about your energy bill spiking because of net zero goals? Charles is out there front and center, putting his name on this plan. It's not just talk, it's changing how we live, from the price of your groceries to the jobs available down the road. Then there's Agenda 2030, a United Nations plan with 17 goals to make the world sustainable. This is widely known. Charles is a huge cheerleader for it, always talking about saving the planet and cutting carbon emissions. Again, who doesn't want a cleaner world? But let's be real, when they push for things like net zero, it's us, ordinary people, who are feeling the pinch. Farmers are told they can't use their land the way they used to. Your gas boiler might need replacing with something more eco-friendly that you can't even afford. And those big companies, they're raking in profits from green investments while the hard-working middle class is stuck with the costs. Charles even started something called the Sustainable Markets Initiative, getting big businesses to pour billions into these climate projects. But when you're choosing between heating your apartment or buying food, it's hard to see how all of this is helping us. We're going to be talking about Charles's Sustainable Markets Initiative, otherwise known as SMI, a little later on in this video. But first, I want to ask the question, why do you think the king is supporting all of this? It might feel a little confusing at first. The monarchy is supposed to be about the people of Britain, right? That's your history, your identity, and your traditions. But Charles is most definitely playing a bigger game, one that's not just about the UK. It's public knowledge he's in support of these groups who want countries to work together under global rules. Less about what you decide in a democratic fashion, more about what's decided somewhere else. You see, the thing is, Charles isn't like a politician you can just vote out. He's the king, permanent, someone you have been subliminally forced to trust. When he backs these global plans, it makes them seem right, noble even, like you shouldn't question them. But when you're waiting for a bus that's late because of some new low-emission zone, or hearing about another person who lost their job to sustainability rules, or you're getting kicked out of your housing for migrants on your own tax dollars, it feels like you're not being asked, you're just being told. It's hard to ignore when you look around. People are simply frustrated, and rightfully so. You see it in the protests. You see the rising costs and the open borders, the Islamists. I'm not saying Charles is the bad guy, but he's part of the bigger shift that's going on, one that's making life harder for many. His role gives these global ideas a royal stamp of approval, but it's you, the working families, the small business owners, the pensioners, who are all feeling not only neglected, but also used because it's your money that they're doing this with. To help you understand more of the positioning being made by the monarchy, let's dig into another piece of this puzzle. Ask yourself this question: why has Buckingham Palace PR spin doctors gone all in painting Charles as the climate monarch? First, let's talk about what this climate monarch label does. By putting Charles's environmental work front and center, the palace is saying, this is who he is now. He's not just the king of the UK, he's a global icon for sustainability. That sounds noble, right? But let's be real. When you're struggling to pay for gas because of new low-emission taxes or facing rules that make it harder to run your small business, it doesn't feel like any kind of win. This move makes Charles look like he's leading the charge on saving the planet, but it's also tying him and the monarchy to the same global agenda we've been talking about throughout this video. The World Economic Forum, with its talk of stakeholder capitalism and those net zero standards we keep hearing about, they're all a part of this same playbook. Charles's green crown aligns him with all these groups, making him their royal poster boy. And that brings us to the bigger picture of what this means. And that is power. Not the kind of power we think of with kings and castles, but the kind that comes from being admired by the world's elites, big corporations, green investment firms, global institutions. By emphasizing Charles's environmental role, the palace is boosting his soft power, his ability to influence people, not just in the UK, but around the world. You see it in the way he's celebrated at climate summits, shaking hands with CEOs and UN officials. It makes the monarchy seem modern, relevant, like it's got a place in this new world of digital IDs and climate treaties. But for the regular folk and the peasants, it can feel like the monarchy's imposing itself in places where it shouldn't be. While Charles is winning applause from global bigwigs, we're left dealing with the fallout, higher costs, more regulations, and a sense that our voices aren't being heard. So now, as the king is positioning himself as this climate monarch, I think the answer to understanding what the real agenda is and pulling back the curtain a bit in further talking about something I mentioned earlier, which is the Sustainable Markets Initiative, or SMI for short, that Charles founded. So to give you a little background on King Charles's Sustainable Markets Initiative, it was publicly launched in 2020 at the World Economic Forum in Davos. The Sustainable Markets Initiative is pitched as this global coalition of CEOs, financial leaders, governments, and institutions working together to transition to a sustainable economy. Its stated aim is to bring sustainability into the mainstream of the private sector.
Our own economy depends on the natural economy. What profit we make, we have to also make a profit for nature. And with this in mind, I am delighted to be launching a Sustainable Markets Initiative.
Beneath all the slick PR and marketing, what this really is a top-down, elite-led project to remold capitalism in a way that preserves elite control, co-ops climate rhetoric, and opens up new financial markets under the banner of, and I think you've heard this before, ESG, otherwise known as environmental, social, and governance.
Everybody needs to come in together and collaborate in a way we've never done before.
Together, we can form a new coalition operating in a pre-competitive way in a spirit of trust and transparency.
Through the Sustainable Markets Initiative and the voice that's being created there, I think we're being heard.
It is the right thing to do. It is also the right business thing to do.
We have to make a real, integrated global effort.
So for everybody to understand, the SMI is not a registered charity or NGO in the so-called traditional sense. It's a private initiative launched under the personal branding of, at the time, Prince Charles, now King Charles, and its operations are hosted within the corporate and philanthropic ecosystem, not regulated by parliamentary oversight or public transparency laws. The key private sectors that are involved are some of the major companies from energy sector like BP and Shell. From the finance sector, you have Bank of America, HSBC, and, BlackRock. You have insurance companies like Lloyd. And then from the tech field, Harry and Meghan's personal favorite, Salesforce. The Terra Carta is the SMI's guiding document, which serves as a vague sort of Magna Carta for the planet, full of these so-called stupid ESG buzzwords, but it lacks any enforceable commitments. You know, when you strip away the visuals to pull at your heartstrings and the really impactful music, the SMI is essentially a CEO club, literally wrapped in royal greenwashing, pushing net zero frameworks that open new markets for carbon offsets, green bonds, and climate finance. In other words, commodifying sustainability. And that's exactly what's going on here. What Charles is backing is not a people-powered movement. It's an elite-backed vehicle paid for by the institutions who stand to benefit from this so-called sustainable finance and climate market engineering. You know, we really have to stop and recognize the Palace PR and how they position and market the royal brand. Everything that's put out about this family is carefully curated, crafted, and specific in the words that they use and how they deliver it, the music, the visuals, all tied into one in conditioning the public, and the key word is conditioning, into what they're selling, or at least trying to portray. This is about influence. This is about maintaining a position. Who stands to profit from this SMI? Well, let's start with the royal family's image. King Charles positions himself as a philosopher king figure, rebranding the monarchy as climate saviors, diverting attention from the historical colonial wealth, the scandals, and political irrelevance. You see, Charles wants to be one of those political figures, but without having to face the so-called democracy challenges. Does anybody think that the late Queen would be doing this to maintain the monarchy's brand, reputation, and preservation for the future? I don't think so. When the Queen told Harry and Meghan, no, you can't be half in, you can't be half out, you can't monetize on the royal brand, she meant it. But what is King Charles doing right here? He's doing exactly what Harry and Meghan wanted to do, but he's doing it in a way that is able to avoid public scrutiny. You see, when Harry decided to move over here to America, he posed a liability to the royal family's finances, and those finances being opened up with the IRS. In the UK, the public is not privy to know if personal investments are being made by the king or anyone from his family. And I'm going to get into how this matters. But continuing on about who else stands to profit from this SMI initiative, you have multinational corporations, the same oil companies and banks that caused environmental degradation, are now rebranding as so-called ESG leaders, gaining subsidies, green finance opportunities, and regulatory loopholes. And then move over to the markets. You have the investment funds. You have now the ESG funds, green bonds, carbon credit schemes, all offering new profit lines for Wall Street and the City of London, packaged as moral investing. Who remembers when Harry and Meghan announced that they were going to be the spokespeople for ethic investments? Ta-da! What do they specialize in? Exactly all of this stuff. When we look at the tech sector, companies involved in climate tracking like Travelist, AI-driven ESG scoring, and digital identity systems tied to carbon impact stand to benefit hugely. Think of this now as a new form of surveillance capitalism. And literally just 2 days ago, the Daily Record was reporting that Brits could be banned from going on holiday as carbon passports introduce. And it says a new report has suggested that Brits could be banned from going on holiday as carbon passports are introduced in a bid to slow down climate change. Now, who do you think is behind this initiative? If you guess the UK government, you would be correct. In partnership with private sector. You know, the whole private-public partnership in this so-called stakeholder capitalism. You know, those buzzwords that you keep hearing over and over from the World Economic Forum. Do you all see how they all tie together?
I am launching the Terra Carta as the basis of a recovery plan for nature, people, and planet.
Now, we all have been conditioned, and I say the word conditioned again, by the Palace PR for decades to push the narrative of the royal family not being political, staying neutral. Clearly, that's not the case, and the royal family are neck deep with involving themselves from a political standpoint, from wars to climate to humanitarian crises. They're in it. Just because the Royal Rota does not report on what is being said in the monarch's meetings between prime ministers, presidents, foreign dignitaries, doesn't mean that the conversations are not happening when it comes to influencing policy and trade, okay? They're happening. And you have King Charles, who behind closed doors, facilitating and influencing with his soft power, not only governments, but also private corporations in this public-private partnership. Do y'all understand what's going on? So for anyone to be so naive to think, oh, Charles doesn't get involved in politics, then you know what? Again, I have a couple more bridges down in Jersey to sell you for $1, okay? More and more, when you look deeper beyond the PR puff fluff, I stand by what I feel. I feel that King Charles knew about what Harry and Meghan were coming to do here in the United States in 2020. This whole sustainable markets initiative is a $1 trillion industry that we're playing with. And for Donald Trump to step in and squash all of that, yeah, you can bet the world was angry. The world didn't want to see Donald Trump back in office because he messed up all of this bullshit. Like, it's no shocker that Al Gore is standing there. He's been pushing this rhetoric for the past 30 years. Do you know how many errors he has made with so-called the effects of climate change? But I digress. When you look at the danger of what's going on here is you have exactly what I told you about Travelist and African parks. This is about climate colonialism. You have wealthy nations and companies dictating sustainability terms that benefit themselves. And you have greenwashing at scale. Those who are polluting, they get this so-called ESG certification, while real environmental action doesn't even happen, or it's just severely delayed. Now, back in 2022, I'm pretty sure many didn't hear about this, but King Charles was accused of helping BP greenwash its image with a royal seal. Now, if I had to guess, the reason why this didn't make any kind of major headlines is because Harry and Meghan, once again, were dominating the headlines and saturating the media with their bullshit. Now, was that intentional? Did the palace prioritize Meghan's stories over this? Maybe. It's always possible, but this was buried. And, I would think that this would have been quite crippling and damaging to Charles's Sustainable Markets Initiative. This is where the hypocrisy comes in, because when this seal, or the terracotta seal, was given to BP, they had failed to achieve a top score from the sustainability ranking company that was assessing them. So it naturally opened up the question of, did BP get this seal because BP is a founding member of the SMI and helps fund the SMI? And this is what I was trying to say earlier. How is this any different to what Harry and Meghan wanted to do with the royal brand? Here you have King Charles giving a seal to BP who didn't qualify to get this seal, but is influential in King Charles's SMI organization. Not only are they sitting on the board, but they're also funding it. So how is that not monetizing off the royal brand? This is like the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. On your screen here are all the companies that have received this so-called special seal and are part of the special club. So apparently these companies are adhering to this mandate that has come down from, at the time, Prince Charles, now King Charles. And there is an 18-page mandate, but in summary, here is what these companies are committing to. It really is transforming the world into this next phase, or this post-national world that they're going towards. But they want you to see it as saving the planet. So I just want to go ahead and point out one thing here. Where it says the foreword by HRH, the Prince of Wales, the first line, it says the interdependence between human health and planetary health has never been more clear. You may not have picked up on it or realized it, but Catherine and William are lockstep with King Charles. Now, I'm not sure how many people remember this, but back in May, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, posted this video titled Mother Nature and Spring. And in the description box, it says, this year's Mental Health Awareness Week, we are celebrating humanity's longstanding connection to nature and its capacity to inspire us and help us to heal and grow in mind, body, and spirit. And everybody thought it was a lovely video and talking about Catherine recovering from cancer. I mean, it just was a real tasteful video celebrating Mother Nature, as well as celebrating her recovery. Now, in Catherine's narration, there is one part where she specifically states this: "It is through nature that we can fully understand the true interconnectedness of all." Going back to the Terra Carta, the interdependence between human health and planetary health has never been more clear. So you see similar messages coming out of both Catherine and William and the king. They are moving lockstep into this new world. Make no mistake, this is all about preservation and relevance for the crown. I'm starting to be really conflicted about what I'm seeing going on here from the institution. Charles is positioning the monarchy, yes, to survive in this so-called new world that, quite frankly, is void of any god. And here you have this focus on the planet, and you see Catherine talking about this interconnectedness with the planet, but nowhere do either of them, at least in my recollection, have they ever gave thanks to God for this wonderful and beautiful planet that we have to take advantage of. And for me, I think that's a huge problem, because the only reason, in my opinion, for why you have the life that you have, and yes, for recovering from cancer, is with the help of the Lord. But if the royal family is supposed to be defender of the faith, they are not incorporating any of it into what should be incorporated into the earth. You have an institution that's supposed to be defending Christianity, and if they're not defending it, then what's the purpose of having them? Now, the thing that really irritates me about this mandate that King Charles is expecting the world to follow is listed in Article 3 of this Terra Carta, the power of consumers, meaning the peasants. It says here, with consumers controlling an estimated 60% of global GDP, people around the world have the power to drive the transformation to sustainable markets. Yeah, because you need us in order to make this work, to line your pockets. It then goes on to say, yet we cannot expect consumers to make sustainable choices if these choices are not clearly laid before them, meaning we're too stupid. Here's the thing, Charles. As a consumer, I don't give a shit to demand sustainable products. If it's more expensive, I'm not going to buy it. It's that simple. Now, I don't know about everybody else, but for me, I genuinely don't look into product life cycles, supply chains, and production methods. But for some, it might actually be important to them. And this whole concept of this Terra Carta seal that Charles is giving out to these select companies is supposed to be the equivalent to like those royal warrants. Apparently, if it's endorsed by the royal family, then, that's better for your business. But in this case, for this Terra Carta, I don't see how it possibly can have that same type of prestige, especially when you're giving this seal to companies who are committing human rights abuses. You have Unilever, you have Nestle, PepsiCo, all have been under fire for sourcing their palm oil through companies that are committing human rights abuses and land right abuses. So how can you take this Terra Carta seal seriously? Especially when you have globalists like Brian Moynihan, who is the CEO of Bank of America, being a chair of King Charles's Sustainable Markets Initiative. Now, for those that don't know, Brian Moynihan had his ass handed to him in front of all of his WEF buddies by Donald Trump at the World Economic Forum. This was America's big fuck you to all of this shit.
And by the way, speaking of you, and you've done a fantastic job, but I hope you start opening your bank to conservatives, because many conservatives complain that the banks are not allowing them to do business within the bank, and that included a place called Bank of America. That's they don't take conservative business. And I don't know if the regulators mandated that because of Biden or what, but you and Jamie and everybody, I hope you're going to open your banks to conservatives, because what you're doing is wrong.
Mr. President, I'll say that your friend Gianni said hello, told me to tell you hello, and we look forward to sponsoring the World Cup when it comes both this summer for the club and next year. So thank you for getting that for the United States.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Let's never forget the game that they were playing the last 4 years. It's those people who cut off bank accounts for anyone who had the wrong think. Look at what happened to Nigel Farage. There were many people here in the United States who were denied bank accounts or their bank accounts canceled as well. So never forget that these are the people that King Charles loves to surround himself with.
We do have a heightened, potentially game-changing opportunity.
People, planet, and profit have to go hand in hand.
It's so important that the private sector is part of the conversation at the G7.
As you can see, the Sustainable Markets Initiative does influence governments, but not in a direct legislative way. Instead, what it's doing here is exerting its soft power and behind-the-scenes policy steering through its network of corporate partners. You add in now the royal prestige, it draws high-level attention to market-led climate action. Conveniently, the same kind that aligns with corporate interests. And then you add in the governments, especially in the UK and EU and Commonwealth nations, and they're encouraged to create regulation frameworks that benefit green investment, applying ESG scoring and carbon offset markets and net zero timelines. So an example of this would be countries adopting carbon credit trading schemes, like maybe something to do with those passports. You have ESG disclosure laws or climate finance subsidies. These are policies that align with the SMI's Terra Carta principles, which call for a new financial model based on the sustainable returns. And that's what this is all about. It's simply money. Then you add in the layer of the royal factor, which many people don't want to admit or acknowledge, of this unofficial diplomatic leverage that King Charles has, all because you have been conditioned by the media to see the royal family as politically neutral. However, King Charles has privileged access to world leaders. He meets heads of state, hosts roundtables at COP summits, and he has spoken at the World Economic Forum, G20, and the UN. Now, I know that many are going to say that, it's the UK government that tells the monarch that they have to do this. Maybe so, but Charles was doing this before he became monarch. So I really don't think for Charles it's an issue. These engagements are not accountable to voters. And let's remember that Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak were WEF members and were following this framework to a T. The way that I see it, King Charles is a non-elected actor influencing global policy by shaping how leaders talk about climate and economics. So from my lens, Charles exercises global influence without formal political accountability. Really, this is an extension of royal soft power into technocratic environmentalism.
You have an obligation to accept the realities of what is going to happen. It's getting worse, but you still have time.
It's incredibly important to bring the business community together. The Sustainable Markets Initiative is such an extraordinary cross-industry, cross-country effort, and we really require that kind of cross-stakeholder collaboration to move things along.
So you notice the language that they're using. When they talk about global solutions, like nobody's asking the people if they're okay with these so-called solutions. Now, prior to doing this video, I had no idea what this was. So I'm pretty sure many of you have seen or passed a wind farm or coming across one of those rewilding signs on a patch in the countryside. That's the kind of thing the SMI is all about. Getting big money from banks to corporations to pour billions into green projects. Now, on the surface, it sounds like a good cause: cleaner air, greener land, saving the planet. Now, I've said earlier that the royals are positioned to profit off of this and the people would never know. When we look at the amount of land that the royal family has in their possession and what they've started to do with it, I believe that there was a documentary that came out earlier this year or last year talking about how King Charles and William's royal estates earn millions from government entities like the NHS, armed forces, and state school in rent. When we look at the Duchy of Cornwall, yes, it is a private estate with a commercial imperative, which achieves alongside their commitment to restoring the natural environment and generating positive social impact for the community. And apparently that there is a significant investment being made to make the estate net zero by the end of 2032. Could this be in alignment with the SMI? You betcha. There is most definitely a return on investment here. Then there's the Crown Estate, worth over 16 billion pounds. It's not just Buckingham Palace or a few castles. It's huge swaths of land from countryside fields to the seabeds around the coast. The SMI's focus on green projects means those lands are gold mines waiting to be tapped. Wind farms on royal seabeds, that's revenue. Turning farmland into rewilding zones for biodiversity credits, more cash. Selling carbon credits to big companies looking to offset their pollution, you get the picture. For us, it might mean higher prices or losing access to land that you may have walked on for generations. But for the royals, it's a way to turn their estate into a modern money-making machine. And here's the kicker. The SMI gives Charles and the royals insider access to these new markets. When you're rubbing shoulders with CEOs, bankers, and government bigwigs, like Charles does, you get to know about the next big thing before anyone else. New green regulations are still being written, new markets are forming, and the royals are right there, ready to jump in early. It's kind of like Pelosi and the stock market, her being in Congress and knowing what bills are going to pass, as well as what contracts are going to be cut. It's the same thing with Senator Coons and why he's so cozy with Prince Harry. Now, this is a big picture. Charles's SMI isn't just about green ideals. It's about steering where trillions of pounds are invested, where the money flows, who gets rich, who gets left behind. His influence over global ESG policies, those rules that decide what's sustainable, gives him a kind of power that pays off, not just in prestige, but in cold, hard cash. So understand what Charles has been doing and William is following is that Charles is positioning the crown for survival and growth in a 21st century world, not by fighting the Great Reset, but actually leading it. And in doing so, the royal family doesn't lose power. They trade their old forms of power, like religious authority or British nationalism, for new forms like green finance, global policy, and soft diplomacy. They're certainly not retreating. What we're seeing is an evolution into something arguably more powerful and far more entrenched in the structures of the future global order. Now, at this point, you're probably saying, no way, the institution would never do that. Here's the thing, folks. We are bombarded literally every day with headlines. Put aside the garbage that Harry and Meghan spew out. Think about everything else. Trust the science. Diversity is strength. These are slogans everywhere, on TV, in the newspapers, even on signs at the local bus stop. They're catchy, they tug at your heart, and they make you feel like you're a part of something bigger, something good. This is what the royal family does. They're there to rah-rah the masses, to getting in line and trusting what is being put in front of them. The Sustainable Markets Initiative video is a perfect example of that, combining all the right words with the appropriate visuals, making you feel like this is something that you should be behind, something you need to champion and support. Like when you look at all these problems or crises, they literally are business models. Every crisis comes with a solution that costs people like you and I lots of money, and it gives them, meaning these elite parasites, more control. Charles's SMI, for instance, puts Charles right in the middle of this, steering billions towards green projects that benefit the royals' investments while the British people pay higher taxes and prices. When you look at migration, we know the story very well. It's a win for NGOs and big firms who get government contracts to manage the influx, housing, and other benefits, and at the same time, also cheap labor, while putting strain on resources for those putting into the actual system and the many that are now having difficulty to find steady work. Pandemics? Pfft, They expanded surveillance and made drug companies richer, while we were told to all stay home and so-called trust science, while our leadership had been out partying. And how do they get us to go along? As we have learned through Harry and Meghan, with the use of clever words and propaganda, plain and simple. Dressed up so nicely, many barely notice. Slogans like Build Back Better or Inclusion Matters. Oh, so warm, so fuzzy. But they're designed to shut down questions. The media blasts these messages nonstop on TV, on your phone, everywhere, until you feel like you're the odd one out for doubting it. We have celebrities, influencers, and yes, even royals like Charles and Harry and Meghan and William and Catherine make it all seem so human, so right. If you speak up, you risk being called a denier, a bigot, a hater, or worse, you get canceled. Always a good way to keep us quiet. And all those images they show us, flooded villages, crying kids, it's all meant to tug at those heartstrings, not your head, so you don't ask who's profiting. So what's really going on here? It does feel like the elites, royals, corporate bosses, global organizations have figured out a well-oiled system. They create the problems or hype them up, then sell us solutions that put more money and power into their hands. We're the ones paying for it through taxes, higher costs, or lost freedoms, while being told it's all for our own good. Charles isn't just watching from the sidelines, he's in the game, guys. His SMI, his green leadership, his talk of all faiths is not just about being a modern king. It's about making the monarchy a key player in a new system, one where global rules override national ones, and where the royals' influence and wealth grows through land deals, investments, and their shiny moral image. For us, the public, it's like we're being pacified. We're told to cheer for saving the planet or celebrating diversity or whatever nonsense that they're pushing out for Harry and Meghan. It's all part of this. But while we're clapping our independence, our national identities, our economic freedom is all being chipped away. And you see it happening in real time. The monarchy, once an anchor, is now a bridge to a world where unelected elites call the shots. Time is running out for King Charles to cement the monarchy's influence and secure his family's role in an emerging post-national world. Donald Trump's 2016 election disrupted the globalist agenda, threatening decades of work towards wealth redistribution, the erosion of national identity, and the establishment of new systems of control. America's Constitution has been a persistent obstacle to these plans. Increasingly, it does seem plausible that Charles may have supported sending his son, Prince Harry, to the United States to help dismantle some of these barriers. That is something that I'm definitely speculating now. In part 2, we'll delve into how closely Harry's actions align with his father's objectives and uncover the true purpose behind his move to America. I'm skeptical of the media's narrative about this couple because over time, we've seen Meghan, Harry, and the palace deceive the public. Inconsistent narratives, manipulated photos and videos, questionable pregnancies, and other discrepancies all point to this saga bearing the hallmarks of a psychological operation. Combine that to how consistently Prince Harry has followed his father's SMI initiative agenda, it's going to definitely make you rethink about everything you've been told about this couple. You definitely don't want to miss it. Definitely leave your thoughts below, and I will be back with part 2. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye.
Such a fraud.